Hello and welcome to today's lesson on the Crusades. Today we're going to be looking at the causes of the Crusades and the outcome of the first Crusades. So your goal today is to be able to explain why Europeans launched and got involved with the Crusades. Materials you're going to need today are this video and your digital notebook. So today you're going to watch this lesson video and then answer the questions that go along with your video in your digital notebook. So Crusades. Well, first of all, before we can talk about the Crusades, we need to understand what the Crusades were. And the Crusades are a series of military campaigns to establish Christian control over the Holy Land, which is the city of Jerusalem. So why Jerusalem? What makes Jerusalem such an important city? Well, if we think back to the things you learned in 6th grade, Jerusalem is considered the Holy Land because it's important in our 3 major world religions. For Christians, Jerusalem is where Jesus Christ was crucified and rose from the dead. In the Jewish religion, Jerusalem is their spiritual capital and the home of their great temple. And for Islam, Jerusalem is the location where Muhammad rose to heaven during his night journey. So all 3 major world religions can trace important events back to Jerusalem, making it very important for their religion. So what caused the first crusade? Jerusalem had been ruled by this group called the Fatimids here. Now, under their control, Christians were able to worship in the city of Jerusalem. However, they were conquered by a group called the Seljuk Turks. Now, we know that all this area of Islam is not part of one major empire, but ruled by different groups who all subscribed to the same religion. Now, the Seljuk Turks were very, very eager to expand their power, and they were creating an empire of their own. They conquered all of the area you see here in yellow. However, they wanted to continue to conquer. So, if we look at this map, we can see that they started to push west. So here we have the Byzantine Empire. We know that this is part of the old Roman Empire. Here's Greece, Italy, and this is what we call Turkey today. The Seljuk Turks began to push west towards Europe. Not only did they conquer Jerusalem, but they also invaded the Byzantine Empire, which caused much stress for the Byzantine emperor, who is named Alexius. So, after the Byzantine Empire was invaded by the Seljuk Turks, the Byzantine emperor Alexius called on Pope Urban, a fellow Christian, for help. And Alexius said, "Hey, Pope, listen, we're being invaded by this really powerful group of Turks. Now, if we fall to the Turks, then guess what? Europe's next. You're going to have to deal with this invasion." And because the Turks were Muslim, the areas that they conquered would then be converted from Christianity to Islam. And so Alexius pointed out to Pope Urban that it benefited him to support Alexius and fight back against the Seljuk Turks. And so Pope Urban sent out a decree. He called for Christians around Europe to rise up and fight against these invaders. He asked Christians around Europe to go to the Holy Land and reclaim it for Christianity. And so we have a new battle cry, "Du le veux," which means God wills it. And we have launched now a holy war. So the Europeans who get involved in this have some objectives. The objectives of the Crusades, from the European perspective, was that they wanted to save their souls. Pope Urban decreed that any European who left Europe and traveled to the Middle East to try and reclaim the Holy Land would immediately go straight to heaven. So what does this mean? This means you could have lived a really, really awful, horrible life, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because if you go on this holy war, this holy crusade, then you could die and know that your soul would go straight to heaven. And we have to kind of think the way people thought back in the Middle Ages. We know that religion is the most important thing in their lives. And so you live a hard life, you struggle, but your reward is that all those struggles will lead you straight to heaven. Now, there were some other objectives to the Crusades. Christians who went and fought in the Crusades had some opportunities. The first opportunity is that they would be able to gain land. So any areas that they conquered, that land would then be up for grabs. And so as a direct result of gaining land of conquered areas, we have wealth. And so what does that mean? It means that if you conquer an area, you get the land, you can reap the rewards of the land you've conquered, but also you can loot, you can steal, you can take things, and none of that matters because you're crusading and you're going to go to heaven. We even have merchants going along. Merchants go along and become really, really wealthy by buying and selling goods from this new area of the world. But most of all, if we look at the bottom of the slide, we see that what the Crusades ultimately do is that they inspire a love of adventure and a promise of spiritual and material rewards. So you will be rewarded both spiritually, and that means in a religious manner, by going to heaven, and material rewards by becoming wealthy. So in the year 1096, we are going to have this first crusade begin. And if we look at this timeline, we can see that there wasn't just one crusade. All the way up until the 1300s, we see crusades happening. I mean, there's 8 crusades. That's a lot of crusades. Europeans are really, really committed to capturing this area of Jerusalem. The word crusade actually comes from Latin, and that Latin word crusade comes from is crux, which is the Latin word for cross. And so we can see that this is really considered a religious war for the Crusaders. They would show that they were crusading by sewing this red cloth on their clothes. Now we're looking today at just the first crusade. We'll look at later crusades tomorrow. But one thing we can remember about the First Crusade is that this is really the only very successful crusade for the Europeans. So if we take a look at this map, we're looking at the First Crusade, and the First Crusade, the map tells us, follows this red arrow. So anything in green is a Muslim land. Anything in orange is Western Christianity. That means the leader of their church is the Pope. Anything in this lighter orange is Orthodox Christianity, and that's another form of Christianity, but their religion is led by their emperor. Now, people from all over these orange areas traveled all the way through Europe, into Asia, through the Middle East to Jerusalem. They gave up their homes, they left their families. Some even sold their whole manors just to fund this trip. They gave up everything because their reward was going to be so great. We have a primary source that talks about how much people sacrificed and how important it was to them in a religious perspective to go along this crusade. And this primary source says, "I never once let my eyes turn back, for fear my heart might be filled with longing for my lovely castle and the 2 children I had left behind." It's important to look at these primary sources when we're talking about history because it helps to humanize things. It helps us to understand that these were actual real people. And so these were fathers leaving their children, leaving their homes. They probably had never traveled farther than a few miles away from their home in their whole lives. And here they are traveling what to them would be a world away. And so there's a lot of sacrifice that goes along with it. But it also shows us how very invested and how strongly Europeans believed in this crusade that they were undertaking. Okay, so the first crusade. If we look at this map shows us the first crusade and the routes that our first crusaders took to get from Europe all the way to Jerusalem, to this Holy Land. So let's orient ourselves. We have these arrows showing us the route they took. Remember that the Crusades began because the Byzantines were invaded by the Seljuk Turks. And we can see that the Seljuk Turks have taken over this whole Asian area of the Byzantine Empire. So what we consider to be Turkey today is now under control of the Seljuk Turks. Constantinople here is a bridge between Europe and Asia, and it's the final front for the Byzantine Empire who's trying to hold off the Seljuk Turk invasions. So in our first crusade, we see French and Italian armies traveling southeast. And remember, their goal is that they're going to march all the way to Jerusalem, and they're going to conquer Jerusalem and take it back from the Seljuk Turks. On their way, they stopped at Constantinople, where they received fresh supplies, and continue on their way. Now, they travel through this area here without a lot of trouble. When they get to what is called a city of Antioch, they're finally able to really engage with the Turks in a meaningful way. And the Crusaders, through some long battles, conquer the city of Antioch. And you can kind of consider Antioch a doorway to Jerusalem. If we look at the Seljuk Empire, we can see that this little passageway is going to take Crusaders directly to Jerusalem. And so by conquering Antioch in 1098, we have a really important gain. Once the Crusaders in 1098 are able to conquer Antioch, they continue to march south. As they march, they're met with Muslim forces. However, these Muslim forces are not united. They spend a lot of time quarreling and fighting among one another. Because they spend so much time quarreling and fighting, it gives the Crusaders an advantage. And the advantage that they get is that they're able to march directly south into Jerusalem, where they invade and they conquer Jerusalem. Now, unlike the Muslim rulers who had let Christians live peacefully, when these crusaders who are on their religious quest conquer the city of Jerusalem in the year 1099, they massacre not only the Muslim inhabitants, but also the Jewish inhabitants, because remember, Jerusalem is not just the home to Christianity, but it is to Islam and Judaism as well. When the Crusaders massacre the Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, they then create 4 Crusader states. So our biggest result here is that because of the First Crusade, the Christians are able to defeat the Muslims, and they establish these 4 Crusader states. Christians from Europe settle in these 4 crusader states. They control all of these areas. And these are now going to become Christian areas. And this is going to be the end of our first crusade. Our ultimate outcome of the first crusade is that we see crusaders winning. This first crusade is a success for them, but mostly it's a success for them because of the disorganization of the Muslim forces. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at later crusades, and these later crusades are going to be evidence that once the Muslim forces organize, unite, and work together, it's very difficult for the crusaders to continue to defeat them. So we can call this first crusade the only real successful win for the crusaders. Your next step is to go to your digital notebook and answer the questions in your digital notebook that go along with this lesson. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at Crusades 2 and 3 and 4, and then look at what the results of the Crusades are overall. Thanks for listening.